FYF Sports, man. It's Lamont, man. We back. And we back again, man. I hate to have to do this, man, but now we got to move on to part 2 of the epic miniseries. 90s basketball was overrated. And today, again, I looked at the comments. Yesterday we did the video that the 90s centers were trash, and then the excuses from the 90s fans, the excuses started to pour in. Well, because they saw that the 90s centers were actually trash, they didn't try to defend the centers that I spoke on, because everything that I spoke on was factual. What they then said was, well, it was a combined, the 90s centers and power forwards. So I'm assuming that they're trying to say that the power forwards were essentially made up the majority of the great bigs in the NBA. I'm also here to debunk that as well. Now I'm really trying to see what power forwards were so great in the 90s. What did they do so great, that just got all these guys elevated to Hall of Fame level. Now, the one thing that we already exposed about the 90s is that there were so many terrible centers that it's much easier for bigs to score in the post. If you were good offensively and you were a big, you were going to score in the league because the bigs of that day were so terrible. Again, we got guys like Chris Dudley, we got guys like Christian Laettner, we got Big Country Reeves, we got Yinka Dare. Again, these are the type of big men that these players were going up against on a night in and night out basis, including the power forwards. So I'm not even gonna waste time today. I need this video short and as simple as possible. I'm not trying to spend a whole bunch of time trying to explain how bummy that these guys were. But now we need to come up with a name for today's video. Power forwards of the 90s. By the end of the show, I'm gonna come up with a name. I need to come up with a really catchy title, man, because again, I don't know what type of words can describe how trash some of these bigs really were. But we're gonna go ahead and jump right into it, and we're just gonna go from there. We're gonna break the myth. We're gonna break the myth that 90s basketball was just this great era of basketball that the 90s fans just cannot let go of. And the reason why I'm doing this, and I just want to explain to everybody, the reason why I'm doing this is because 90s fans like to use this era to trash players of our era right now. All right? They try to use this era to say, oh, Charles Barkley was this, Karl Malone was this, Horace Grant was this, Shawn Kemp was this. Well, now we're going to really debunk that myth, because again, in our generation, the standards are a bit higher. You have to do more than just score a few points. You have to do more than just grab a few rebounds. You actually have to have some results, man. If the results do not show that you're a great player, as far as affecting wins and losses and consistently putting your team in a situation to win championships, I can't put you in this elite class of player that you say that these 90s bigs are in. So we're gonna go ahead and get to it. We're only gonna run through 20 names. Again, my goal today is to get through this as quickly as possible, because again, I don't have time to be speaking about bums of the 90s all day. So again, I've categorized this as best as possible. Again, this is my top 20 power forwards of the 90s. All right, top 20 power forwards of the 90s. We're gonna go through their strengths, their weaknesses. There are gonna be a lot more weaknesses than anything, because the one thing that I noticed as I put this list together, we have a lot of one-dimensional players. One-dimensional players who only play one side of the ball, and they were not very skilled basketball players. So we're going to start the list off, and we're going to start the list off here with enforcer of the NBA, Charles Oakley. I guess he was the tough guy of the league. He was the tough guy. If your man was, if your man was doing you bogus, if your man was embarrassing you on the court, if your man was talking crazy to you while he was eating you alive, like everyone was eating these bum centers alive, well, Charles Oakley was the enforcer to come out there. Again, we're not talking about an extremely skilled player. He's a brute. He's a brute force. He scored with just straight power. His game was extremely ugly. He was slow. He was not an extremely fast player, but he was a strong enforcer. If you needed to give a hard foul, he could give you a hard foul. There's not really too much to his game other than he just intimidated people with his size and strength and the fact that he didn't care if he got suspended for punching you. Again, to guys in the 90s, that may be an attribute. I don't see how that's an actual attribute in the game of basketball. But again, guys in the 90s, this is what they like. They like that style of play. If you can't beat them, just beat them up. And again, that worked for them in the 90s. I think it's quite embarrassing to me if you can't guard somebody that you have to resort to just hacking and fouling. But now we have Charles Oakley at number 20. We're going to move on. Next up, we got Tom Gugliotta. I mean, I actually like Tom Gugliotta. I love the name one, but I actually love him on the game, NBA Jam. He's actually pretty solid on NBA Jam. He can do it all. He was one of the first power forwards who kind of established that true mid-range game. I wouldn't say he was great at any one thing. He was just kind of average at a lot of things. I would say he was a pretty good rebounder and scorer. Nothing special. Not necessarily. He made a few. I think he made maybe 1 or 2 All-Star games in the 90s, but no championships, no All NBA teams. Nothing extremely great about a Tom Gugliotta. Now, when we talk about his game, he was definitely one-dimensional. He was an offensive threat. He was a good rebounder. Defensively, he was invisible. Well, a lot of these people will not be honest about his game. I'm here to break the game down honestly. Again, we got Tom Gugliotta. Not very impressive at all. Again, when you're looking at some of the elite power forwards right here, Karl Malone, Horace Grant, Barkley, these guys ate Tom Gugliotta alive. We got to go next up. Next up, we got Otis Thorpe. I like Otis Thorpe, man. Otis Thorpe was the power forward alongside Akeem Olajuwon. Now, Otis Thorpe had one of the, not only was he ugly, but his game was just as ugly as well. And he was just a very average big. He played hard. He was great defensively. Offensively, he was trash. But you know what? He's better known to me because he got traded straight up for Chris Webber. And Chris Webber is one of the Hall of Fame power forwards that these guys like to harp on. But he was traded for Otis Thorpe. Not a very good player in the NBA. Now, would he make the NBA today? Probably not. He couldn't shoot. He couldn't dribble the ball. No way he could be on the NBA floor today unless it was in spot minutes. So there we have Otis Thorpe at the next position. Next up, we got Juwan Howard. This man had a very, very odd career. He had a very, very odd career because he started his career off coming out of Michigan with a lot of promise. Just never panned out. They paired him up in Washington with Chris Webber, his former teammate in Michigan. And again, when you put two losers like that together on the same team, the end result can only be more losing. These guys were in a championship game at Michigan. Somehow Chris Webber did not know that they were out of timeouts. He calls a timeout and has the most epic meltdown blunder in NCAA history. Again, when you pick a player like that, extremely low basketball IQ, and you pair him with Juwan Howard, again, these are two average players who only cared about the offensive end of the court. And when you have two bigs that only care about offense, you have a formula for a losing team, and that's what we had in Washington. Now, the excuse by many is that, well, they ran up against Michael Jordan. That shooting guard comes up again. That's what they ran into time and time again. This is why they couldn't find success in the East, because of the shooting guard in Michael Jordan. Again, a team that was missing bigs. Next up, we have, if my computer can act right. All right, next up, we got Larry Nance. Man, I spoke on Larry Nance yesterday. Larry Nance is extremely athletic. I think he could play in the NBA today, not because of his offensive game, but just because of his sheer athleticism. We see that he has a son in the NBA today who's doing fairly well. I think he's with the Cleveland Cavaliers, but his son plays a similar game. Not much to their offensive game other than just a lot of athleticism and the ability to just jump up and dunk all over you. So, again, I think he could fit in today's game in spot minutes, being able to come in and be an athlete, be a rebounder, be a good defender. I think he would be serviceable. But in the 90s, he didn't do anything. He didn't strike any fear in Jordan's eyes. The Cavs were never able to get to a finals. They never were a true contender because that shooting guard again that dominated the 90s, the shooting guard that did dominate the 90s did not allow any of these so-called legendary bigs to do anything. Next up, we got Kevin McHale. Now, Kevin McHale in the 90s, he had to get put on his list because we have so few good power forwards in the 90s, but we had to put him on that list because of what he did for basketball in the 80s. Again, he was part of some great Celtics teams, some great championship teams. He had a great career in the 80s, but in the 90s, his career started to fall off. He was a lot older, similar to Robert Parrish, just didn't have much left in the tank at that particular time. Next up, we got Antonio McDyess. Oh, no, hold on. Antonio Walker. I'm sorry, you guys. We have Antoine Walker, and I need to say his name correctly. Antoine Walker, he had one of the more disappointing careers in the NBA. Great talent. His game would definitely translate in the NBA today. He was one of the first players to just chuck up a lot of threes. He was the first James Harden type player, a volume shooter that shot a lot of threes. He starred in his role. The Celtics actually gave him a big $100 million contract. But again, 90s power forwards didn't have that much sense. He ended up blowing all his money. He gained a lot of weight, got out of shape, and found himself out of the league and irrelevant. So with as much promise as he had in his career was derailed by his fitness and bad habits and investments off the court, which again, in my book, that all goes hand in hand together as a trash NBA player. So we have Antonio Walker, trash. Next up, we got Tom Chambers. This is one of my favorite players. This guy could definitely play in this era because his ability to score the ball, shoot the ball, and he was a pure athlete. I like Tom Chambers' game. He was in multiple All-Star games. He put up big numbers. He definitely did not get the credit he was due in the NBA for whatever reason. I'm not sure why he was looked over time and time again, or maybe it was because of the teams that he was on. He just never found his way into the NBA Finals. But he was great. He was in the opposite conference of Jordan. He was never able to lead his team to match up against Jordan at that particular time or whatever team he was on. So again, at the end of the day, I have to consider that as a failure. Again, if you're not getting to consistently getting to championship games, if you're not winning, if you're not at least going head to head with some of the great players in the playoffs, then you're just a regular season player. And the regular season doesn't get it done. It's what you do in the playoffs that matters. So we have Tom Chambers, a great regular season player, but when it mattered most, he shied away. Next up, we got Danny Manning. And Danny Manning, again, one of the more boring players of the 90s. His name sounds boring. His game was boring. And then we look at his jersey. He played on the Los Angeles Clippers, one of the worst teams of the 90s. This team was a perennial loser. Although Danny Manning did put up decent numbers on a terrible team, I don't give him credit for stat padding on a team that got blown out on a nightly basis. So we have Danny Manning, now currently a coach, finding some success, but as a player, he did not play up to expectation. Next up, we got Larry Johnson, Grandmama. Again, nothing bad to say about Larry Johnson. Again, he's a great player. Great player, career derailed by injury. Towards the end of his career when he was with the Knicks, again, he let his fitness go a little bit. So he gained weight. He wasn't the same athlete with the injuries. So again, we don't know what his career could have lined up to be had he not experienced so many injuries. But he was a part of that group of power forwards that started to change the game, shooting more jumpers, playing a bit faster, going up and down, shooting threes. They started to change the game, so he would definitely be able to fit in today's era. How great would he be? I don't know. I don't necessarily know. I could see him being possibly like a Blake Griffin type, but how much that will translate into winning championships, I don't know. But for a lot of these 90 fans, all you have to do is average 20 points a game at one point in time in your career, and you're a Hall of Famer. So I don't think he's done enough to be a Hall of Famer. He definitely had the brand. He definitely had the fame. because again, the Grandma Grand, the Larry Johnson shoes, the Charlotte Hornets jersey in the 90s is some of the biggest things. So I definitely appreciate what he gave to the game, and he helped change the game for the better by showing power forwards how it should be done. All right, we got Horace Grant. We got the Trader, man. This guy is the Trader, man. Played with the Chicago Bulls. He was the third wheel on a Bulls team that won 3 NBA championships. As we saw when watching The Last Dance, Jordan did punk this man a lot. Jordan, a small shooting guard. Even on his own team, Jordan was able to dominate the only big on the team that they had that actually had some skill. Because again, those bigs back then were soft, and we saw that with Horace Grant. Jordan took the man's meals on flights when he played bad, and Jordan dished out punishments to this guy this guy couldn't do anything to bounce back from. So when Jordan retired, Horace Grant also decided to jump ship and run to the Orlando Magic, who had some promising young stars. And over there, he actually flourished. He had 1 All-Star season, but again, nothing really of concern there. He eventually partnered back up with his coach Phil Jackson, where I think he won a few more championships. But again, he was the 3rd, 4th wheel on that team as well. Never was an essential part of any team. Jordan would have won championships with or without this man. But we got Horace Grant. Next up, we got Derrick Coleman. Derrick Coleman out of Syracuse, man. Another player right here in the 90s. If these guys just knew how to maintain their fitness, stay in shape, we would see more longevity, more success out of these players. Just another guy who allowed his love for Krispy Kreme donuts to force him out the league. And that's essentially what happened with Derrick Coleman. Again, his fitness was a problem his whole career. It's what forced him out the league. He was a great talent. But I guess he was just, he was just a detriment to his own self with his eating habits. So Derrick Coleman, he was on a perennial loser most of his career in the New Jersey Nets. Put up great numbers in certain seasons, but for the most part, we never saw how great he could be because he never was able to reel in and control his diet. Next up, we got Kevin Garnett. Now, again, some of these power forwards in the 90s, and he's one of them, were legit Hall of Famers, legit great players. Kevin Garnett came into the league a leader. Again, he was a true big man. He did not allow the little guard on his team to run him out of town, Stephon Marbury. And when Stephon Marbury saw that Kevin Garnett wasn't going to back down, Stephon Marbury got up out of there. So he wasn't able to do the bigs in the league like Jordan did everybody in the league, essentially punk every big in the league on a night-in, night-out basis. Now, Kevin Garnett was not able to win anything in the 90s. He was not able to win anything until the 2000s, once Jordan retired. But again, we know the 90s was dominated by one single shooting guard, and that was Michael Jordan. Oh, we got Vin Baker of the Bucks. Vin Baker of the Bucks. Oh, man, we got so many players with potential. We got so many players with potential, but the potential just never got him anywhere. And he's another big in the Eastern Conference. The only thing I remember is watching games on WGN and watching Vin Baker get destroyed by the Chicago Bulls whenever they played them. That's really the only thing I remember about Vin Baker. Now, I know when I collected basketball cards, the one thing I did know is that he was a good player. He was able to amass some decent numbers. Is he a Hall of Famer? I don't think so. He never won anything in his career, was never able to find success in the playoffs. And I think that, again, in a league full of trash centers and big man, you can look at who's guarding him now in the post. We don't even know who those players are for the Golden State Warriors. It's clear to see how he was able to dominate because he was playing against school teachers and garbage truck drivers. Next up, we got everybody's favorite, man. Everybody's favorite. We got Chris Webber. Now, Chris Webber, again, another promising athlete, just didn't have any basketball IQ. Now, we got 2 knocks on Chris Webber. Extremely low basketball IQ, was not a smart basketball player. Second thing is he only lived on one side of the court. That was the offensive end. If it was offense, he was all for it. If it had anything to do or related to defense, he didn't want anything to do with it. Now, some people will say, oh, he averaged 1, maybe 2 blocks a game. Yeah, he did, but any rim protector is going to average that. just by standing around. You don't have to move your feet. You don't have to play defense. And defense was not in his men's vocabulary. On top of the fact that he constantly was injured. But also when he was in games, the only thing he worried about was getting to his stat line. And he was able to do that for the majority of his career. But he sacrificed his stats for getting his stats all the time for winning and success. This man never had success in the playoffs. The only time he had to go to the finals was the Sacramento Kings, and that was in the 2000s. But when we're talking about in the 90s, this guy spent most of the time on the injury reserve and did not do anything. I felt like he was a detriment to his own career when he was in Golden State. Had a great rookie season. The team was 50-32 with a lot of great players around him. He didn't like the coach. So he forced a trade out. He forced a trade out of a great situation, and everything went downhill from there. Injuries started to happen. He was consistently on losing teams. He found himself playing Michael Jordan in the playoffs all the time. And again, we know that one shooting guard that dominated the entire 90s because everybody else was so trash. Well, again, Jordan was there to let everybody know this was a shooting guard league. When I say shooting guard, he was the only shooting guard in the league, and he was able to dominate every big in this big man era. Next up, we got Dennis Rodman. I got nothing bad to say about Dennis Rodman. This man came out and played with energy and effort every night. He would 100% be able to play in this era. Again, now he's a liability on offense. Coaches would have to be smart with him because he's a liability. You can't have him in games late. You can't have people just hacking him, sending him to the free throw line. But with his ability to rebound the ball, this man could play in any era. He could defend in any era. And again, it's not that he was the fastest or the strongest. This man would outthink you. If he can get in your head, he's going to get you out of your game. I got nothing bad to say about Dennis Rodman, greatest rebounder in NBA history. Next up, we got Shawn Kemp. Shawn Kemp, another guy. This is a consistent theme with the power forwards of the 90s. Again, we see that he was great early on. Career simply derailed by the fact that he could not maintain or control his diet. These guys cut their career short because during the lockout, instead of Shawn Kemp staying in shape, during that lockout season, he chose to sit around and eat soul food all day, every day. And he came back from the lockout about 50 pounds heavier and was never the same. We got Shawn Kemp, one of the most athletic players in NBA history. Again, not much to his offensive game. Not a great shooter. Not even necessarily a great driver. He played off ball, and because he played with a great point guard, another great point guard that led that team in Gary Payton, he was able to, catch alley-oops, catch passes on the weak side, get a lot of dunks, and score a lot of points that way. So I feel like Gary Payton helped him become great. Now, Shawn Kemp did have a good season in Cleveland. I think he made the All-Star one year when he was extremely overweight. But again, when you can make the All-Star game when he was a Cleveland Cavalier and he was extremely overweight center, that just tells you about the quality of bigs that you have in your league. And they were trash. Next up, we got Tim Duncan, the greatest power forward of all time. Enough said right there. Champion. Can't say anything about Tim Duncan. Just definitely one of the greatest power forwards of the 90s. And not just any. And the thing is, I don't even really want to give him too much credit for the 90s because he came in towards the tail end of the 90s. He came in at the tail end of the 90s. And then he had to carry a David Robinson to a championship. So a player like David Robinson would not have a championship if one of these guys of our era hadn't come in and saved his career. Next up, we got Charles Barkley. Charles Barkley again. Now we're getting up there. Charles Barkley is the number 2 player on this list. Now, what's the common theme with these power forwards of the 90s? Common theme with Charles Barkley is he never was able to control his weight management. He never was able to get a grasp on that. That derailed his career because as he got older, carrying all that weight, he was just simply a walk-in stop sign. He couldn't do anything on the court. He couldn't defend, and in his whole career, even though he had the athleticism to do so, this man never played defense. Similar to Chris Webber, I don't know what it was with the power forwards of the 90s, but they were allergic to defense. They never played defense. They all wanted to play like guards. as we can see right here, Barkley wanted to be a jump shooter. He, although he did go inside and bang from time to time, again, his career never panned out. He never was a champion, although he had all the potential to be. But if he'd have kept his mind right, if he'd stayed away from those Krispy Kreme donuts, if he'd have stayed away from those Krispy Kreme donuts, he possibly could have eked out a championship in the NBA. But unfortunately for Barkley, he was a great offensive scorer. He played one side of the court, and it cost him when they matched up with Jordan in the championship. We saw he was great offensively, but defensively he didn't care about it, and they allowed Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, and those guys to run out through him. And last, we got the mailman, Karl Malone. Again, not much bad to say about Karl Malone. Karl Malone, one of the top scorers in NBA history. Again, with Karl Malone, the one thing that's overrated about his game is his defense. A lot of these power forwards just did not care about defense on the defensive side of the court. Karl Malone was definitely elite, definitely a great scorer, could probably dominate in this era. I feel like his offensive skills were good enough to where he could extend his game beyond the three-point line, maybe have a good face-up game and beat guys to the bucket. That's just how skilled he was offensively. But defensively, he was a shadow. He was non-existent on most nights. Again, it's easy to say that he was a good defender because he was going up against trash bigs. I mean, he had a trash big on his team in Greg Ostertag. So again, I think he gets looked at as a better defender than what he really is because of the competition that he went against on a night in and night out basis. And then the competition that was actually guarding him. When you got players like Shawn Kemp, Charles Barkley, players like that who don't really care about the defensive side of the ball guarding you, of course you're going to light up all of the power forwards in the league. So that's how we round out our list, man. That's how we round out our list. We just got straight to it, and we systematically broke these guys down from top to bottom. Again, there were some Hall of Fame bigs. When we're talking about the likes of Charles Barkley, Hall of Fame offensively, straight trash can defensively. When we're looking at Horace Grant, he's been labeled as a snitch. And not only has been labeled as a snitch, he's been labeled as a punk because he's just allowing Michael Jordan to dictate when he can and cannot eat. I don't respect that. And then we got Karl Malone. Now we got Karl Malone here. Again, a guy that was allergic to the defensive side of the ball. Only thing he wanted to do was score off that pick and roll with John Stockton. And again, at the end of the day, because of their major defensive deficiencies, either because of their poor diets or either because of their inability to play defense, they allowed a shooting guard by the name of Michael Jeffrey Jordan to dominate the 90s. So when I look at the 90s, I say the 90s is overrated. One, the 90s was not a big man league. The 90s had a lot of big men, but the 90s had a lot of garbage big men as well. And so when you look at the list of power forwards, is it slightly better than the centers? Yes, it's slightly better than the centers. But across the board, a lot of these players have glaring flaws in their game. And that's just not me saying that they have glaring flaws in their game. A lot of these guys did not win anything. Karl Malone never won a championship. Barkley never won a championship. Horace Grant had to ride the coattails of Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant to get championships. So it's the same thing with the power forwards. That's all we got to say there, Exposing. Again, our job is just to expose the myth that 90s basketball was the greatest. We're dealing with a lot of players who couldn't adapt to today's game. The game today is too fast. The game today requires high-level offensive ability, meaning you're not just bullying guys on the low post. That means you have a face-up game. That means you have a back-to-the-basket game. That means you have the ability to put the ball on the floor beyond the three-point line. You have a decent handle, and you can attack in that particular style because of how defenses are cluttering the paint and making guys like this make plays. And that's one thing we did not see with any of these guys. Because these guys were able to bully their way around the 90s, they were never forced to actually make plays. Charles Barkley, not a great passer. Same with Horace Grant. Same with Karl Malone. That's all we got to say, man. Power forwards of the 90s. Power forwards of the 90s were definitely trash as well. Aside from a few at the top, again, I got nothing bad to say about Tim Duncan. I love Karl Malone's game. His offense was dominant enough to make up for his atrocious defense. Charles Barkley, again, hit the combination of his trash defense and his inability to stay away from Krispy Kreme. limited him. This is why he never won a championship. And again, across the board, we can go down the line. We see consistent problems with power forwards of the 90s. So again, there we have it. FYF Sports, man. Make sure you guys hit that subscription button. Hit that subscription button. Hit the notification bell. We've just went over the garbage truck power forwards of the 90s. That's what we went over. Tomorrow we will be doing the small forwards of the 90s. Again, because I already know that the next excuse is going to be, oh, well, you called out our centers and power forwards. It was also our small forwards that were big as well, because I know that's coming. Again, they're running out of excuses. So I'm just going to go ahead and debunk the small forwards as well, which is going to probably be the worst list of all of them. The small forwards of the 90s. You guys are going to be quite surprised to see how trash the small forwards of the 90s actually were. Again, FYF Sports, man, it's been another great video. It's FYF Sports, and we out.